apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We're going to be talking about a lot of different issues. Paul Manafort has been indicted. We'll get into that a little bit later this hour. John Zmirak will be joining us by phone a little bit later as well as we talk about one of his articles in the stream. But we're going to start off, first of all, by doing what we do so often, and that is really highlighting a Christian film that you may want to attend. And this one is already out. It's in the theaters right now, Let There Be Light. And the individuals that are involved with this are with us by phone. Kevin Sorbo has been in studio with us before. Matter of fact, we got a good picture of him holding my daughter's Brussels Griffin, of all things. And he and Sam Sorbo join us by phone. Kevin, it is always great to have you on the program with us.
Good to be here, sir. How you guys doing?
I am doing well, and we are in a new studio, so next time you're in Dallas, we'll show you the new studio, which I think is even better than the last one we had in there. But Sam, let me also welcome you to the program as well.
You know, I also have a Brussels Griffon, right?
I know that. That's why we had so much fun taking a picture with him holding it. So that was fun. Anyway, we have lots in common, but we want to get to the film immediately so we have enough time to focus on it. This is another story. Kevin, it's amazing. As an individual that is a person of faith, you end up playing the bad guy so often. So I once again have a story about Dr. Saul Harkins. An individual who loses his son to cancer, and then you become kind of a celebrity atheist debater. And in the midst of this, some really remarkable things take place. So tell us a little bit more, first of all, about the story, and then also about the fact that what it took to get this produced.
Well, I think we should start with Sam with that, because she's the one who brought the story together. She wrote it. And
perfect.
About her idea.
Okay, Sam, I'd love to hear from you. I've never had a chance to meet you face to face, but tell us a little bit more about the story, because it is a powerful one indeed, isn't it?
Well, thank you. Yes, it seems to be very powerful. We had an amazing opening weekend, and people are clamoring to see this film, and people are clamoring to see it again. I'm hearing reports of people going back to the theater for a second and third showing. But I will say, I was tired of the typical fare that was coming out of Hollywood. I'd stopped going to the theaters, basically. I'm tired of the bang 'em up, blow 'em up, shoot 'em up, joyride type of movies that leave you sort of feeling empty inside. And I thought of what it would look like if the world's greatest atheist had a crisis of faith, because atheism is its own religion. And I thought, now that's interesting. Wait a minute, that's a film I would want to see. And so fairly selfishly, I just decided to make a film that I wanted to see. And I started working on it, and I thought, I need somebody who's a good writer to join me on this. And I called Dan Gordon, who is an excellent Hollywood Oscar-nominated writer. He wrote The Hurricane with Denzel Washington and Wyatt Earp with Kevin Costner. And he immediately agreed to come on board when he heard the idea, because it's a true human drama. It's life and death. It's forgiveness and grace. It's grief and joy. It really touches on the human condition. Within 2 weeks of his agreeing to come on board with me, Sean Hannity reached out to my husband and said, I want to produce a movie, and I want to produce a faith-based movie, and I want to produce it with you. And do you have anything? And of course, Kevin said, well, as a matter of fact, we do. And the three of us, Dan, Kevin, and I, flew to New York, talked to Sean for less than half an hour, and he wrote us a check and sent us off to make a movie and said, show it to me when it's done. He's the best executive producer anybody could ever hope for.
Yes.
And I will tell you that the genesis of this movie is nothing short of miraculous. And the fact that that audiences are receiving it with such enthusiasm, it is touching people and moving people, and it will help grow the church. It will help bolster your faith. It will help you through your grief. It will help you through forgiveness. I mean, it's doing amazing things. And I'm just thrilled to be a small part of it.
Well, again, Sean Hannity, executive producer. Of course, we know the director, Kevin. And let me just for a minute mention that on our website here, we have a link to lettherebelightmovie.com. And there are two things I want all of our listeners to do. Number one, we have a trailer. It's a little less than 2 minutes long. You know what I ask you to do every time we have one of these movies. We encourage you to watch the trailer, and then there is a button, a kind of a share button or an arrow. And that means you can put it on your Facebook page. You could send it by email to a friend. I would encourage you that if you have a Sunday school class, to encourage the whole class to go. We've done this so many times around the table here, and to take that information. Number two, there's a button there that says buy your tickets today. So some of you might say, well, I don't know where the nearest theater might be that will actually have this film. Well, then you can type in your zip code and find an opportunity near you so that you can go. And Kevin, talk about this for just a minute, because, of course, you've already had the opening, and we unfortunately got you before it opened, but that's okay, because the second week is almost as important as the first week. So if people show up now, it also is sending a signal to Hollywood that you want more films like the one that Sam wrote.
No question about it. I mean, it's still important. I mean, we only opened on, I think, 360, 370 screens. And that's actually pretty good for a $3 million budget movie. And we can't compete with those $200 million movies that open on 3,000 screens in Hollywood. And yet, here we still finished number 10 in all the movies that are out there right now. And we finished number 2 with the second best screen average per theater. We finished number 2, beating out all these big Hollywood movies. And that is a direct result of people going out there and being the foot soldiers for us, the foot soldiers for God, to let Hollywood know that we are tired of the movies you guys put out that don't have characters that people care about, don't have characters that people can relate to, don't have characters that can have the same problems we have, but are able to go through, find redemption, find faith, find hope, and ultimately this is a love story. And it's a wonderful, wonderful story. You cannot believe the emails that are coming in. Mm-hmm. It's incredible. So we're adding another 200 screens this weekend alone. And it is very important. We will have to keep this movie going for the next 4, 5, 6 weeks in theaters and keep adding screens. The Variety and Hollywood Reporter magazines, of course, trash movies like this because, you're dealing with agnostic and atheist points of view. And yet, when Variety came out with a negative article about it, they got hit with 100 people coming at them, 100 different people from across the country blasting them and saying, well, now that you guys have cut this movie down, I'm going to go see it. And just as we're talking here right now, up on my phone in the text came a message from somebody that I know in Alabama. They have 47 churches going to the movie this week. They said they're going to fill up 14 buses. That's amazing. And that's what we need. I mean, that's what you need to make movies like this successful is word of mouth. That's what made God's message do so well.
Yeah, and let me just add to what Kevin said. What's amazing is now Hollywood has decided rather than trash the movie, they're going to ignore it. And so the Hollywood Reporter reported this morning on the weekend box office and reported on Suburbicon. In fact, the lead photo in the article was for Suburbicon, which bombed miserably. It's a George Clooney film.
Yes, it did.
It did nothing. And
they had 8 times more theaters than they take in as much money. So what does that say?
It says a lot. Right. We need to take a break. I want to come back and continue our conversation, but I have one of those mandatory breaks, and we know about that. And again, recognize that since we're broadcasting all the way from Florida to Maine, from California to Alaska, you are located someplace where there is a film. It's maybe going to be easier for you next week to go to it and this week, and we encourage you to do so. We have a link to lettherebelightmovie.com. We'll come back with more right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
The plight of persecuted Christians is worse than ever. That is the conclusion of a recent report by Aid to the Church in Need. It documents that persecution of Christians today is worse than at any time in history.
Not only are Christians more persecuted than any other faith groups, but ever-increasing numbers are experiencing the very worst forms of persecution. In some countries, the situation is already severe, so it's hard to imagine how it could be any worse. Other countries, like China, have seen intolerance on the rise, as evidenced by a clampdown on dissident clergy and the destruction of churches. In light of this, I was deeply convicted by my recent interview with Johnny Moore. He came on Point of View to talk about his book, The Martyr's Oath. He begins the book, and we began our interview by talking about attending a Bible school graduation ceremony. The students repeated this martyr's oath in which they pledged their lives and death to Jesus. He felt like he was standing in the book of Acts, witnessing a raw first-century Christianity that had been shielded from him in America. It says things like, "As he has given his life for me, so I'm willing to give my life for him. I will use every breath I possess to boldly proclaim his gospel." It later goes on to say, "Though persecution may come, I know my battle is not against flesh, but against the forces of evil. I will not hate those whom God has called me to love. Therefore I will forgive when ridiculed, show mercy when struck, and love when hated." Johnny Moore often asks himself, why are so few of us in America willing to live for Jesus when others are so willing to die for him? It's a good question all of us should ask ourselves. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation for a few more minutes on the movie Let There Be Light. If that sounds familiar, you know that we've been playing some of the promos for that at the bottom of the hour. You'll get a chance to hear that again in just a few minutes, and encouraging you to, as always, make sure that you vote with your pocketbook and make a point of really showing Hollywood the kind of films you'd like to see. And this is one of those that we wanted you to know about. Again, the trailer is at the website. Of course, we have a link to LetThereBeLightMovie.com. You can go there directly. And Sam, let me come to you for just a minute, because a lot of our listeners say, okay, I really want to go to a movie, but are there any advisories, any parental warnings? Do I bring my children to it? What kind of age? Can you give us a little bit of a hint on that?
Of course. So it's rated PG-13, but unfortunately it doesn't really live up to that rating, because it's rated PG-13, I think, for some there's a driving scene and there's some drinking in the movie, but there's no language, there's no sex, there's no, so it's barely a PG-13 is the way I would put it.
Sure. So it's a car crash, really. Yeah.
Yeah, I have friends who have a 10-year-old. She absolutely adores the movie. So, it's really, but I would be there with your kids when you watch the movie, because it does deal with weapons, which is something that our tries to or avoid. And of course, this is the quintessential question as a Christian: is what is the purpose of life? Does life have meaning? And that's partly a little bit of what the film addresses. I wanted to get back to this Hollywood Reporter article, though.
Sure.
Just a little. Hollywood is being shown to be immoral, morally bankrupt, even corrupt and evil. This film did number 2 overall per screen average up against the big guys, number 2, and yet the Hollywood Reporter did not report on it. Report. They literally ignored the movie. It's like they don't want people to know that there's a choice.
Yeah, I'm having a little trouble with your phone. Kevin, can I come to you for just a minute? Because it, again, is an illustration of the fact that sometimes you can do censorship by simply ignoring some of the events that are taking place, or in this case, ignoring a movie.
Well, Hollywood has their agenda. I mean, every movie has an agenda. Every movie has a faith attached to it, I think. Atheism is certainly a faith. So, that's what they're going to do. But the reality is most people, it's only insiders, Hollywood insiders, that read that rag anyway. So
yes.
I'm okay with that. But it is frustrating that they ignore it so blatantly. But that's kind of the world we live in right now. Even with all the reality and smut coming out of Hollywood with Harvey Weinstein. I mean, the casting couch has been around forever, and it's about time some of these guys get busted because, I never had to put up with it, but I know plenty of people that did. And, it happens in all businesses as well. But it's a power play, and young people, mostly women, come out to Hollywood, and they want a career, and they fall prey to it, So it's there. But
tells them that that's the right thing to do also. The culture upholds that. Let's face it. I mean, Harvey Weinstein got away with it for years and years and years because people were willing to look the other way and acquiesce. And so, what we need people to do really this weekend is to send another message to Hollywood, because the louder we are, the more they will be forced to listen. It's the same thing that happened with the NFL when people started giving up their subscriptions to NFL Sunday or whatever their television subscriptions are, and they stopped buying tickets. The NFL had to sit up and take notice. And the American, the forgotten man and woman, and the conservative Christian in America has recently realized that their voice actually does count for something, and it's time we push back. And we push back into the culture, and that's what this film is attempting to do. So I'm just appreciative of anybody who can offer their support just by going to the theater. Invite a friend. If you have a friend who you kind of want to invite to church, but let's face it, the culture kind of frowns on that. It's a huge stigma that's attached now to inviting somebody to church with you. Invite them to the movie instead. It'll give you something to talk about, a launching point, if you will.
Well, that's what I was thinking, because if you have an atheistic friend, I think for the first part of the film, they could probably relate pretty well to Dr. Saul Harkins, couldn't they?
Sure.
Yes. Well, sure. And, in reality, I don't want to necessarily preach to the choir. I do want to reach across the aisle, so to speak, and reach out to the agnostics and atheists. I've had them stop me in airports before and say, look, I don't believe the way you believe, but I saw your movie, What If, or Soul Surfer, God's Not Dead, whatever it was. And they say, you know what, I thought it was a pretty good movie, and there was a couple moments there that guy spoke to me. Well, that's a win-win. I'm not out here to change the world with this, but at the same time, I'm hoping to, in a little way, kind of reverse the culture and get back to what the founding fathers wanted this country to be and what made America so great.
Well, again, I would encourage people, if they haven't already, get the DVDs or download things like God's Not Dead and What If. But this one is an opportunity right now in the theaters. Let me give one other suggestion. I know our Sunday school class sometimes can get enough individuals interested that you can actually call the theater up and ask if they might even put together another showing. And we've done this more than once. And so this is where I want people to go to the website, lettherebelightmovie.com, watch the trailer, maybe send it to your pastor, your Sunday school leader, your Bible fellowship leader, and say, we could just rent out the entire theater. And between those of us that would want to go, and then we invite our friends, we could actually increase the number of showings even in that particular theater. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, so Kirby, not only that, but on the website, you can do group ticket sales for a discount. So if you have a group, you can qualify for a discount. And I'm not sure what the thresholds are, but I also know people have been just opening a theater. They buy the theater at a discount, and then they know that they're going to resell the tickets for whatever they paid for them. And in that way, they actually open up a theater near them. So you can check the website, lettherebelightmovie.com. It has all the theater information. It has the group ticket sales. And by the way, if your pastor wants to pre-screen the movie, because you have to be careful about what you're endorsing these days. We make it available to any pastor. He just logs in with his pastoral email, and he gets to screen the movie for free. That's also up at the website as a way of just our outreach into the community. We really want this movie to touch people's hearts and minds and souls, and we found that it certainly does. And the emails are amazing. If you go to or my Facebook page. We each have official Facebook pages. You can read some of the responses that we're getting. I just copy and paste them because they blow me away. It's just amazing how this movie is lightening people's burdens.
Can I just jump in? You just spoke, because it's interesting. You're in Dallas, Texas there, and I just got a text message from a very good friend of mine, and she's the personal trainer of President Bush. She's at the theater right now at will be like a 1:20 showing or whatever there.
Wow.
And she said the theater is full.
Right.
And it's Monday at 1 in the afternoon.
Well, we're doing our best to try to get as many people out there. Let me also mention the endorsements that you've had as well from Franklin Graham and Mike Huckabee. Of course, we've already mentioned Sean Hannity and a number of other individuals. So this is one where I don't think anybody's going to have any hesitation of taking their Sunday school class and taking their kids with them as long as they're a certain age.
No question. I just got help from Tim Tebow this morning, and he's going to give his endorsement as well.
Well, there we go. So we're going to put all of that on the website. Let me just mention that we also do have a link to the Facebook page. We have a link to the website, lettherebelightmovie.com. We're just about out of time. So, Kevin and Sam, any final comments or admonitions you want to give to us before we move on?
I just really want this movie to bless people, and I'm seeing that it does. And so, we have people who are specifically going to see this movie. They're driving an hour and a half because that's the closest theater. They haven't seen it in 20 years because they're fed up with what Hollywood has been promoting for the past several decades. But they've taken the time to go see this movie, and they're writing to thank us. This movie will bless you. It will give you hope. It will uplift you, and you won't regret it. And so that's what I'll say.
Very good. Let me again mention that on the website there you can find out more about the group sales, which I was going to mention. Already a list of the theaters that are carrying it, the others that will be. And again, if you need some more information, I would encourage you to, first of all, go to the website, watch the trailer, pass it on to some others, and let's see how many people we can have show up in the theaters right away. So, Kevin and Sam, it's been a delight to have you on the program. Let's do it again soon.
Kirby, thank you so much. God bless.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to spend some time talking about some of the issues in the news. Of course, ex-Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort in the news, so we'll talk about that. We're also talking about the NFL, so we've got to talk about what happened yesterday with the Houston Texans, all of them taking a knee and why they did so, and then we'll get into some other issues that we've been following. One of those is the votes that will take place on a number of judicial nominees, and that's just in the first hour. Then when we get to John Zmirak in the second hour, we'll have some more issues. One, his article, Pro-Choicers Need Their Own Seamless Garment. I'll knit them one, and you will enjoy that conversation as well, I suspect. So if you'd like to join us, perhaps also if you had some comments, maybe you've seen the movie or you just think it is appropriate that we do from time to time emphasize these Christian films, then I would love to hear from you as well. 1-800-351-1212. If you'd like to join us at any point along the way, feel free to give us a call. If not, sit back, take some notes, pay attention. We'll be back right after this.
From director Kevin Sorbo and executive producer Sean Hannity comes Let There Be Light. Saul Harkins is a man who has turned away from God, but a near-fatal car crash gives him one last chance to renew his life, his family, and his faith. Let There Be Light, rated PG-13, may be inappropriate for children under 13. Now playing. More information is available at lettherebelightmovie.com.
Christianity is based in history, on evidence, and all truth revealed in God's Word is for our good, not just spiritually, but in every way. Point of View's mission is to restore God's truth in our culture, and to do it effectively, we need you as a partner. Your gift helps inspire people, young and old, from coast to coast to rebuild truth in their communities. Join the Truth Team today at pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Get off the sidelines. pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. When you have a chance to hear from Kevin and Sam Sorbo for just a minute in that first half hour, the movie Let There Be Light. I'm just a firm believer that we need to have more Christian films, and we need to send a signal to Hollywood that we would like those kinds of films. So if you feel that you can attend a Christian film, and as she points out, there are some that said, I haven't been to a film in years, but I came to this one simply because it was endorsed by so many individuals, and it was an opportunity to maybe send a signal that we want more family-oriented films and faith-oriented films, then certainly check that out as well. Let's get into the news, and certainly one of the lead stories is Paul Manafort. He was the campaign manager, came on about in March, actually left by August. We'll get into some of the details there. Really was, in some respects, not only the campaign manager, but an individual that helped kind of orchestrate the convention. Well, he has been indicted by the special counsel, Robert Mueller. Now, he's not being indicted for anything he did during the campaign. The actions they are talking about happened well before that. But it was not too surprising to some of us that he might have been indicted. Probably should be indicted more by the FBI than the special counsel, because it has, as far as I can tell, very little to do with the campaign, other than the fact for a short period of time he was with the campaign, of course. But the whole idea of Russian collusion doesn't fit very well. But in the investigation, they surfaced what I think was pretty obvious, and that is Paul Manafort, when he was even asked about some of his dealings with Russia, and in particular Ukraine, we see that what happened is that he wasn't always as forthcoming as he could be. And I love the piece that came out today by Jim Garrity, in which he was talking about some of the things that he would say didn't pass what you might call the straight face test. Jim Garrity refers to it as the smell test, but he says back in August of 2016, Paul Manafort was making public denials of corrupt behavior that didn't pass in what he calls it the smell test. Statements like, for example, I have never received a single off-the-books cash payment as falsely reported by the New York Times. Okay, well, maybe, but the campaign actually let him go, or he stepped away from the campaign in August because there was this story in the New York Times, and this came from various work done by Ukraine's National Anti-Corruption Bureau, which released scans of about a number of ledger items, and these are what are called black accounts. And in that, Paul Manafort's name appears in quite a number of those for payments totaling about $12 million. And this is from about 2007 to 2012. Like I said, this is years before he was ever involved when the Trump campaign. But nevertheless, that's one issue. But he also said, again, I have never received single off-the-books cash payment as falsely reported by the New York Times. Then he goes on to say, nor have I ever done work for the governments of Ukraine or Russia. And I love Jim Garrity says, well, nobody worked for the pro-Russian political party in Ukraine. And again, he had work that was tied to the pro-Russian Ukrainian president at that time. So there are some issues, obviously, with Paul Manafort. And indeed, he may actually not only be indicted, but he may actually be convicted of tax evasion or a variety of other issues. But I think this is a good place where, again, for just a minute before I move on to some of the other stories, I can give you just a sense of needing to have some discernment. If there's anything I want to try to pass on to you at Point of View, it's that when you open up your newspaper, you turn on your television set, you listen to a radio program, including this one, you read various articles on the internet, use some discernment. Those people that are going to be pro-Trump supporters are going to say that Paul Manafort probably did nothing wrong. If he did anything wrong, it might be that he misrepresented something similar to Scooter Libby. They might say, well, who's Scooter Libby? Well, you go back to the Bush administration here. In another investigation, Scooter Libby was caught up and eventually indicted and convicted, although he was eventually actually given some kind of leniency by President Bush. simply because in that investigation of who outed Valerie Plame Wilson as being a CIA operative, something which most people knew anyway, he, I guess, in one presentation, maybe one deposition, say deposition A, said one thing, and in deposition B said something different. And so the misrepresentation or the lying caused him to be indicted, convicted, and then eventually, essentially almost pardoned. That wasn't the actual word, but certainly brought to some kind of freedom from President Bush. And so you're going to have some people say, well, Paul Manafort maybe said one thing to one FBI investigator and something else to someone else, so he's accused of being lying. And, of course, a lot of times people say, well, you can indict a ham sandwich. That's the old line. So on the one hand, you're going to hear that. On the other hand, you're going to hear those that hate Donald Trump and want to get him impeached to say, here, this is now firm evidence that Donald Trump has colluded with the Russians, which, by the way, ignores what we've now learned over the last week about the DNC and Hillary Clinton working on the Russian dossier. But nevertheless, I think the truth is somewhere in between. It is possible that he had some kind of connection to Ukraine between 2007 and 2012. It is possible that, indeed, some of those black accounts were his. It is possible that, indeed, he has done something that requires not only this indictment, but a conviction. We'll see where that is, but it certainly does not in any way, shape, or form end up being a smoking gun proving that Donald Trump or his campaign colluded with the Russians in the 2016 presidential election. So that's one issue on the table. Real quickly, I'm going to mention another one just because it's worth a mention, because we've been following the number of individuals that have been kneeling at these NFL games, and we heard that mentioned just a minute ago by Kevin and Sam Sorbo. You know, especially Sam was talking about this. You know, after a while, Americans got a little bit tired of seeing that. And if you turned on the Houston Texans yesterday, you would see that all of them, other than about 10 of them, took a knee during the game. Now, it wasn't so much about Black Lives Matter. It wasn't so much about police brutality. A lot of it simply had to do with the fact that the team owner, whose name is Bob McNair, in a presentation that he gave in front of the various owners, said, we can't have the inmates running the prison. Okay, bad choice of words, because it sounds like that he's saying that the players are the inmates in prison. Of course, you probably heard the phrase, we can't let the inmates run the asylum. Or I've heard nicer ones, you know, in the banking industry, they sometimes say we can't have the bank being run by the tellers. Or in the cruise industry, we can't have the entertainers piloting the ship. But nevertheless, he later on, that is Bob McNair, in a post said, as I said yesterday, I was not referring to our players when I made a very regretful comment during the owners' meeting last week. I was referring to the relationship between the league office and team owners and how they've been making significant strategic decisions affecting our league without adequate input from ownership over the past few years. But nevertheless, that was enough for some of the players to say, indeed, he's referring to us as prisoners in a prison. And again, he went on to say, I'm truly sorry to the players for how this impacted them and the perception that it created of me, which could not be further from the truth. Our focus going forward personally and as an organization will be towards making meaningful progress regarding the social issues that mean so much to our players and our community. And as I've said before, just about the time you think this whole idea of kneeling during the national anthem is going to die out, what do you find? Is something else. The other day, of course, it was a tweet by President Donald Trump. In this case, it was a statement made in a meeting with league officials that was then probably poorly reported, certainly poorly reported. And then, as I understand, Bob McNair even tried to meet with the players, tried to defuse that. But nevertheless, if you saw yesterday, almost the entire team of the Houston Texans took a knee during this time in which we are supposed to be honoring the flag and honoring those who have given their lives to us and providing an opportunity to bring us together as a nation. And, of course, it once again is tearing us apart. So if you have some comments about that, the kneeling and so many other issues, we will certainly take those phone calls, 1-800-351-1212. We come back, I want to talk a little bit about where we are on some of these judicial nominees, what that might mean to religious liberty and many other issues. And if you'd like to join us on that issue, 1-800-351-1212. And then we'll have, in the second hour, John Zmirak with us. We have noticed that now that the pain-capable abortion bill has moved from the House to the Senate, there seems to be an increase in the number of, if you will, pro-choice gotcha questions to pro-lifers. So we're going to spend some time talking about how to respond to those that either people ask you face-to-face or pose on Facebook or maybe send in an email. So we've got a lot to cover today. Want to equip you to be effective. But if you'd like to join our conversation, we'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. A recent article out of Canada reports that ethicists are recommending that conscience laws be modified for the medical profession. The argument suggests that physicians should not have the right to opt out of providing such services as prescribing contraceptives when a patient requests such services. According to the authors, quote, doctors must put patients' interest ahead of their own integrity. If this leads to feelings of guilty remorse or them dropping out of the profession, so be it, unquote. That is truly shocking language that we should take note of, especially since, as the article in the National Post points out, every country in the civilized world recognizes at least some form of conscientious objection. Not only do the authors suggest that certain professions should be closed to those with whose integrity would require the abandonment of the conscience to practice it, it fails to understand what conscience actually is. The reason we provide protections for the exercise of conscience is because people should not be made by the government to make their conscience optional. As Dr. Robert George of Princeton University has put it, quote, the right of conscience is a right to do what one judges oneself to be under an obligation to do, unquote. We will see whether Canada takes up the proposal by its professors, but south of the border, we must be vigilant that we never permit the government to make optional what our Creator has made obligatory. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Augusta, Georgia first. Larry, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you. Thank you for setting my call.
Yes, what would you like to add to our conversation?
Well, you know, we're talking about these guys kneeling. I was flipping the channels last night, and I saw Houston kneeling, and I thought, oh, this is just awful. What's the next change? What next team is going to do this? Is this going to fall into high school or college football? You know, it's just so crazy. These guys are making millions of dollars, and they're just destroying their character to the people who support them and pay billions of bucks to watch them play ball. Well, I don't agree with the way they're doing. I think they need to stand up. I'm a veteran of the United States Air Force.
Thank you.
And I don't think they should be doing what they're doing. And what we're doing with this, what are we doing with Hillary? This other situation where this guy is going to court and they found some evidence against him, well, what's going on? Are they using that to hide what Hillary and Bill Clinton did during this campaign?
I think they are at the moment. I think that is the case. And again, this one is going to have legs sooner or later because the Washington Post last week, Clinton campaign, DNC paid for research that led to the Russian dossier. Right. And then you got the one in Hill that came out the week before. The FBI uncovers Russian bribery before Obama administration approved controversial nuclear deal with Moscow. So you have mainstream press now covering it. Now, what I thought was so interesting is over the weekend, the Meet the Press, which is kind of, the standard, the gold standard for the talking head shows, never mentioned it. So, again, they're going to try to ignore it. They're going to try to deflect it. But now that you've got some of the coverage in the mainstream press, I think it's going to go forward. Even if the press doesn't cover it, I think the Republican Congress is going to say, wait a minute, you've got this independent investigator, and this is the best you can come up with, something that Paul Manafort did years before he was even involved with the Clinton campaign. Let's close this one down, or let's have you go and look at the more significant issues of Uranium One and the whole issue of the Russian dossier and being paid for in terms of op research by the DNC and the Clinton campaign. So we'll see where that goes.
Yeah, 10-4 on that. I just don't know. I just don't think that these kneeling deals should be going on any longer. I think the president needs to step in there and do something, but I know they have a right to do this. But it should not be allowed in a public arena, as a football, baseball, or whatever it may be. You don't involve politics into sports. You just don't do it.
And again, ESPN found that out, didn't they? Because the more political ESPN has gotten, the less people have watched ESPN. And, of course, the less the people watching NFL. Our next caller wants to talk about how it gets people's attention. Well, it did. But, again, I come back to two key words, time and place. Time and place.
That's right.
And exactly is that the time and is that the place, especially during the national anthem? I have a morning show that I do on Mondays that's a local show, and so I was talking about on that program there that one of the local ABC affiliates put together a roundtable that included a number of people that were sports broadcasters and African-American leaders and people on the police force, and one of them there was Debbie Georgiadis, who's been a co-host and a guest host on this show. I said, though, at the time, if they'd invited me, halfway through the presentation, I would have pushed my chair back, gotten on my knee, and raised my right hand, and then started protesting a number of things. It could be the number of abortions or the opioid epidemic or whatever it might be, and then get back in my chair and say, now, I'm looking at everybody's face here. Some of you look like this was an awkward situation. Some of you look really angry that I did it. And why is that? Time and place. We're supposed to be having an honest discussion around the table about this issue in terms of the NFL kneeling, and you didn't feel that this was the appropriate time and place. The fact that you have that feeling tells me that's exactly what a lot of other Americans feel when they see some of the kneeling there on the field. But anyway, Houston Texans set a record. I think more of their players kneeled than any others I've seen lately. But let's get back to the phones and give a few more of you a chance to join our conversation. We'll stay in the state of Georgia for a minute on the Good News Network. Maria, what would you like to add to our conversation?
Hi, Kirby. Thank you for letting me talk. I'll be brief. My comment is also on the football players kneeling, and I heard you say time and place. However, when a protest is going forth, they don't try to make it convenient for those, who are in the most comfortable positions. Instead, they're trying to make people uncomfortable in order that the message will get out. So I think that this is the time and place for them to do the protest. I don't think a lot of Americans agree, but if you think about it, the majority still is Caucasian, the majority of the population. And so that means the majority of the population watching the football games is probably also Caucasians, and they probably won't agree because many times they don't understand what's going on in the black community. And I've experienced that for myself several times, especially over these last couple of years. But if you're making a protest, you want to give a message out to the people, and you want to get it to as many people as possible. And I think this is why they've chosen this particular time and place. And even if people don't agree, I think that's the point of a protest, to get it out in a place where it will make people uncomfortable and where it will cause people to look and see what's going on. So thank you.
Sure. I'm not sure Colin Kaepernick expected it to go as far and as long as it has, but it certainly has. Let's take at least one more phone call on that topic before we move on. In Ohio, Art, thank you for joining us today. Please add your comments as well.
I just wanted to pick it back off what the previous caller was just talking about. It started out being about social justice, and somehow or another it got misconstrued, and everybody wanted to talk about disrespecting the flag and the national anthem, and that's not what it was about. But they wanted to change the topic to about the flag and the national anthem instead of talking about the issue that's being trying to push forward. And like I say, I served in the military for a while and stuff, and it's not about disrespecting the flag. It's about taking a stand against some injustice. And that's the way I see it. But instead of people talking about the true narrative of the situation, they want to talk about being disrespectful to the flag and the national anthem, and that's not what they're doing.
Sure.
Because if you look in the stand, right, everybody not standing, and everybody not putting their hand over the heart, or some of them that I've seen on the TV, instead of putting it over the heart, they're putting it over the stomach, So,
yeah, that's for sure. I'm coming to a break here, but I got your point. The point I was making is as far as I can tell, yesterday, the Houston, Texan protest had more to do with a statement made by the team owner, Bob McNair. And I'll take him at face value. Here, the founder and chairman and chief executive officer of the Houston Texans was talking about his problem with some of the things at the NFL, and the team was construing that to instead mean that he was saying that they were inmates running the prison, which is not what the case was. So I think, if nothing else, what unfolded yesterday with the Houston Texans kind of makes your point, Art. We've kind of lost the perspective here. Now, all of a sudden, anytime I'm upset about something that the owner says, the president says, or whatever, we've kind of lost the original idea in terms of justice. And so maybe, as I've suggested, and even one of my guests in the first hour in my local show here in Dallas suggested, maybe we need to find another context to really highlight that issue of justice. So anyway, that's kind of a point that I wanted to bring on the table in case some of you saw all those Houston Texans kneeling yesterday. You might have said, what's this about? Well, as far as I can tell, it was about some miscommunication that came from the owner, Bob McNair. So anyway, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to be joined by John Zmirak. We have posted his article today, Pro-Choicers Need Their Own Seamless Garment. I'll knit them one, and we'll come back and talk with him right after this.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We're going to be talking with our good friend John Zmirak, who, by the way, is the senior editor of The Stream. We got talking with him the other day when we had Eric Metaxas in studio. He and Eric Metaxas shared the same English class, but at that time, Eric was not a Christian. So he tells a story about he and everybody else kind of looking at some of the comments that John was making. And then later, when Eric became a Christian, he said, John Zmirak was right, and I was wrong. So we're going to spend some time talking about some of these, if you will, pro-choice gotcha questions that are starting to surface here now that the pain-capable bill on abortion is moved from the House to the Senate. I'm starting to see those surface in Facebook and other places. So we've posted his article, Pro-Choicers Need Their Own Seamless Garment. I'll knit them one. And then a little bit later in the program, we might get into a couple of other issues. We have the Senate confirmation hearings this week for a number of judges. We'll get to that. A decision of a church in Virginia to remove a plaque involving George Washington, because after all, he was a slave owner. And then maybe we'll get into some of the things by Robert Knight about Wikipedia, which he calls Wackopedia, and also Dennis PragerU suing Google and YouTube, getting into censorship. So we've got a couple of things to cover in this hour, and if we don't do it today, we'll get back to it tomorrow. But again, if you're not familiar, John Zmirak has been on the program with us a number of times, received his bachelor's degree from Yale University, Master's of Fine Arts in Screenwriting and Fiction, as well as a PhD in English from Louisiana State University, and an individual that we certainly depend on for various articles that he writes. So, John, thank you for joining us once again here on Point of View.
Thank you. Good to be on.
You know, one of the issues that you address in this article is what you hear so often, and you hear it because of the issue of capital punishment. That is, well, I'm pro-life, but I also believe in the death penalty. So what you get back from individuals is, well, then you should have a seamless garment. If you're pro-life on abortion, you should be, quote, pro-life on the death penalty. But what I like you doing here is turning it around and say, wait a minute, while do pro-choicers favor choice in every circumstance? Talk about that, because I think it's a very effective way to argue the case.
Sure, and there are some people who seem to think, who want to turn the pro-life position on abortion into a utopian ideology. Especially you see this among left-wing Catholics who want an excuse for voting for people like Hillary Clinton or Tim Kaine. They pretend that the pro-life position is a utopian position, that we favor every single possible thing that could conceivably be seen as extending anyone's life at all for any reason whatsoever. So if I can show how your policy might lead to someone's accidental death, then no matter what the cost, you're wrong. And it's so they'll say, you have to be for open borders because some of those immigrants might live longer if they got free health care in America. You have to be for Medicaid and Obamacare, expanded Medicaid, because you know what? You might be extending someone's life. You have to be for gun control because guns are sometimes misused and can kill people. And they use that. They don't really expect us to sign on with that program. In fact, virtually no one in America, almost 0%, is actually embraces a seamless garment like that. And I think that they intentionally have this utopian position so that the pro-life position on abortion, where it's actually relevant, is obscured. So to make this clear, I said, well, let's stop the double standard. If we're going to say you're not really pro-life unless you're against the death penalty and presumably defensive war and presumably self-defense using weapons, then okay, how about this? You're not really pro-choice unless you favor a landlord's choice not to rent to people of a race he doesn't like, a worker's choice to work at less than the legal minimum wage, a healthy person's choice to sell a kidney on the internet, a woman's choice to sell her services as a prostitute. How about a consumer's choice not to purchase health insurance, or a religious order's choice not to fund abortion pills for its employees? Nobody expects people who favor legal abortion to favor all those things, because they recognize that the pro-life, pro-choice divide developed in one specific context. In the context of abortion, which value is more important in this context? A woman's sexual choices and her sexual autonomy and the sexual autonomy of the man who got her pregnant to evade his responsibilities, or the life of the unborn child? That doesn't mean that in every other situation you have to apply it, any more than the pro-choicers are in favor of getting rid of the minimum wage or legalizing prostitution, presumably.
When again,
now,
it's a very good argument.
Because,
yeah.
Yeah, thank you. It's irrefutable. That's why no one's answering it. They're pretending it's not there. You know, it's funny how the seamless garment people always, on every issue, they pretend there's one pro-life answer, and it always means more power for the government, more seizure of wealth to be redistributed by politicians, acting in the short-term interests of some people without concern for long-term consequences, like letting in millions of Muslim so-called refugees. Oh, we're not allowed to think about the fact that some of them are going to be terrorists, but that they'll vote for Syria. You're not allowed to think about that. Or enforcing mercy for some at the expense of justice for others, as in the death penalty. What's interesting is if you really want to get seamless, if you really, really want a seamless garment, you're going to have to go further. You're going to have to cut speed limits like 40 miles an hour. That would save thousands of lives every year. It doesn't matter that it would slow down the economy, it would inconvenience people, it would make life in Wyoming almost unlivable. It doesn't matter. Human life has to be paramount. So why not 20 miles an hour? I'm not sure where we draw the line. Maybe everyone should ride in those bumper cars that you see at amusement parks. Nobody will get hurt then. You'd have to outlaw smoking, period. That would save thousands of lives. Who cares about people's liberty? You'd have to strictly limit the number of calories that every citizen is allowed to consume every day. Do you know how many people die from obesity? Or you're going to say that people's choice about what they eat trumps life? Then you're not really pro-life. One further step. We need to be like North Korea and require daily aerobic exercise for every able-bodied American. Again, that would save thousands of lives.
Let me take a break. When I take a break, I want to come back and mention just real quickly that if that came really fast and furious, it's in the article that you've written, and it's about 3 pages long, but it's just very helpful because, John, really the reason you're doing this is you run into those people. You get emails all the time. Of course, you're a very visible person as the senior editor of the Stream, and so really what we wanted to do today is sort of equip people to get this article and realize there are some quick ways to respond to those kinds of comments, which are starting to multiply on Facebook right now, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. And I'm sorry, I'm from New York. I'm used to talking at this speed. But here, let me just give everybody one, okay? If somebody says you're inconsistently pro-life for supporting the death penalty, just say, well, okay, do you think should we lower speed limits to 40 miles an hour? That would save a lot of lives. Just stick with that one.
Yeah. And then, of course, point out that if you really say you're for choice, you really don't believe that a landlord should be able to choose who he or she would allow in based upon race. You certainly wouldn't allow a worker to work for less than the legal minimum wage and all the other issues you listed there. So let's take a break. This is one article we've posted, and we really want to equip you because you will start running into these arguments. When we come back, I'm going to surface another one that I've run into, and I'm sure John probably has some comments. I know I do because I have a commentary coming out based upon his column, as well as some other things I've found, because you're going to need to be equipped. There's going to be a battle for life, and so we want to equip you to be effective. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
The plight of persecuted Christians is worse than ever. That is the conclusion of a recent report by Aid to the Church in Need.
It documents that persecution of Christians today is worse than at any time in history. Not only are Christians more persecuted than any other faith groups, but ever-increasing numbers are experiencing the very worst forms of persecution. In some countries, the situation is already severe, so it's hard to imagine how it could be any worse. Other countries, like China, have seen intolerance on the rise, as evidenced by a clampdown on dissident clergy and the destruction of churches. In light of this, I was deeply convicted by my recent interview with Johnny Moore. He came on Point of View to talk about his book, The Martyr's Oath. He begins the book, and we began our interview by talking about attending a Bible school graduation ceremony. The students repeated this martyr's oath in which they pledged their lives and death to Jesus. He felt like he was standing in the book of Acts, witnessing a raw first-century Christianity that had been shielded from him in America. It says things like, "As he has given his life for me, so I'm willing to give my life for him. I will use every breath I possess to boldly proclaim his gospel." It later goes on to say, "Though persecution may come, I know my battle is not against flesh, but against the forces of evil. I will not hate those whom God has called me to love. Therefore I will forgive when ridiculed, show mercy when struck, and love when hated." Johnny Moore often asks himself, why are so few of us in America willing to live for Jesus when others are so willing to die for him? It's a good question all of us should ask ourselves. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
John Zmirak with us, and again, senior editor of The Stream, author of The Politically Incorrect Guide to Catholicism, as well as an individual that has his Ph.D. in English and has really begun to articulate various views for us in The Stream. We have, of course, a link to The Stream, which you can find, but also, of course, we've posted this particular article, "Pro-Choicers Need Their Own Seamless Garment. I'll Knit Them One." And a lot of the reason we're covering this is, one, because these are articles and arguments that are surfacing and comments. I think in part because earlier this month, the House of Representatives passed the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. So the issue of abortion and pro-life is in the news. It has now gone to the Senate. There's a real possibility that the Senate might be able to get an up or down vote on it, and if that's the case, there's no doubt that President Donald Trump would sign that. So in some respects, it's raised the stakes a little bit on the pro-life debate, and that's why we wanted to cover this one. John, there's another one that I use in a column that I have coming out this week, commentary that I do, and it comes from Patrick Tomlinson. What he does is he says, you know, you pro-lifers really aren't honest, because he says, hypothetically, imagine there's a fire in a fertility clinic. Would you save 1,000 embryos or a 5-year-old child? Well, since most people would obviously save the child, he concludes that pro-lifers really don't believe an embryo and a child are of equal value. But Professors Robert George at Princeton and Christopher Tollison at the University of South Carolina have a book out called Embryo, A Defense of Human Life. And in the appendix there, they actually give an answer. And it's a pretty simple one, and that is, okay, we recognize an embryo is not a baby, but it is a member of the species Homo sapiens. Every developmental biology textbook declares that human beings begin at conception, and unless deprived of a suitable environment or killed by an abortion, this embryo will develop into an infant.
all of us were former embryos. None of us can say that we're a former ovum or spermatozoan or something like that. So if nothing else, these are some important issues that we certainly need to address. And so we'll get John on in just a minute to kind of get his comments. But if you'd like to join us today, that number is 1-800-351-1212. We recognize that some of these pro-life arguments are really going to be very significant. And what I'm starting to run into are what I call these pro-choice gotcha questions. And the one from Patrick Tomlinson is a good example. Would you save 1,000 embryos or a 5-year-old child? And I think if we really wanted to be honest in a pro-life point of view, why can't you have a 5-year-old child in one arm and if you will, frozen embryos in some kind of liquid nitrogen in the other? Because you have all, and we've all seen these snowflake babies were originally frozen embryos. So what we're seeing, John, are just a number of kind of pro-choice gotcha questions. And I think it's important for us to not get caught up in the questions, but to really articulate our pro-life convictions. Don't you agree?
I completely agree. The fact that they need to come up with these elaborate, crazy hypotheticals for discussing what is literally the most common thing in the world, the conception of a human child, that they have to invoke these science fiction scenarios, just tells you that they're trying to evade the truth.
Well, and Ben Shapiro, there's a video that a lot of people are watching right now where somebody stands up and says, okay, I understand you're pro-life, but let's talk about a woman who is unmarried and is raped. And so Ben Shapiro jumps in and says, okay, again, first of all, you're taking the exception, but okay, let's make it worse. The child is genetically defective. He's going through all this hypothetical that you have to go through to then try to argue what you might do. Right. And again, the point I make is that even though most of these pieces of legislation, including the Pain Capable Unborn Child Protection Child Act, would have exceptions for rape, incest, life of the mother, and things of that nature. The reality is you're always looking at a fraction of a percent or a percent, and that's really bad law, and it's certainly bad ethics, isn't it?
Right, and I've got a good comeback for that. When someone tries to make the case for abortion in the case of rape, I would simply say, do you support the death penalty for the actual guy who raped the woman? And typically they'll say no, if they're not lying. And they'll say, but you want the death penalty for the child? That's kind of confusing to me. I'll tell you what, I'll make a deal. I'll allow abortion in cases of rape if you're willing to execute the rapist. You going to make a deal on that?
Never had anybody make the deal with you yet, have you?
Yeah, no. In fact, I've done that with the death penalty. Almost everyone who's against the death penalty is for abortion. Some of them are lying about it. There's a tiny, infinitesimal fraction of people who actually try to embrace the seamless garment. But most of the time, if you come up with somebody and they say, well, you're for the death penalty, they say, fine, let's do a trade. I'll eliminate the death penalty if you'll eliminate abortion. Deal? They never take the deal.
That is a good line.
If they do take the deal, though, then it's time to push them further about pushing the speed limits down to 40 miles an hour.
Again, these are just the kind of conversations we can have. Of course, the other answer to the rape issue is that over these years, doing this program for more than 30 years, I can honestly say that I have many times been sitting across from an individual whose mother was raped, one of whom actually was the person who started the stream, and others as well, whose mother was raped and could have not been in existence if we even allow that exception. And it's hard for me to look into that woman's face or that man's face and say, you don't have a right to be here. So there's obviously just the emotional argument that sometimes people find compelling as well.
Well, here's what I would say is, when they were trying to outlaw slavery, the abolitionists believed in equality, but they didn't necessarily push for every single measure of equality. Like they didn't say, well, you can't abolish slavery unless you also get rid of racial discrimination and have affirmative action and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. They recognized that they had to be incremental. We have to be incremental. We have to try to save as many lives as we can. Now, here's an important point of language, though. We should never call a law an abortion law restrictive or strict. That's the enemy's language. We want laws that are protective, that protect more and more and more categories of unborn Americans until finally, when America fully wakes up, they're all protected. So we'll say, I want a more protective law. You want a less protective law. That alone, that argumentative point, makes a big difference in the argument.
Wow. You know, one other case I wanted to bring before you is when we let you go in just a minute. When we come back, we're going to talk about some of these judicial nominees, but one in particular has been singled out, and that is the Notre Dame law professor, Amy Coney Barrett. Now, she's Catholic, obviously going to Notre Dame, has been nominated to the Seventh Circuit, but you have Dianne Feinstein having a problem with the fact, not that she's Catholic, but she believes it. In other words, really about 6 out of the 9 Supreme Court justices are Catholic. But remember what she said, that is Senator Feinstein, your dogma sings loudly. And it's almost like we're starting to say for Catholics, it's okay to be Catholic as long as you don't believe Catholic dogma or the Catholic catechism. And that, of course, is a concern I would imagine that you have as well.
Yeah, I find it kind of comical that the question, her views on abortion hinge on whether or not she's a Catholic. You don't need to be Catholic or even Christian to see that abortion is the killing of a human being. It's something that natural reason and science and basic morality point to. And making it a Catholic thing, they're acting as if they're afraid she would outlaw the serving of meat on Fridays in Lent or mandate that everybody has to say the rosary. This is not a Catholic issue. You know, the famous pro-life geneticist Jerome Lejeune, who discovered the gene for Down syndrome and campaigned to protect children with Down syndrome from abortion, he said if the Catholic Church changed its mind on abortion, he would leave the church. It is prior. The human life is prior. It's before any religious revelation. If God didn't exist, abortion would still be killing a human being. Maybe you wouldn't care because life is meaningless, but it would still be the killing of a human being. So making this about her religion, it's just a red herring.
I think so. Well, again, we have a link to your article. Pro-choicers need their own seamless garment. I'll knit them one. But also, of course, that will take you to stream.org. Of course, you're the senior editor, and I would encourage people to go and find all the great articles. Of course, you write one every single day. So, John, I appreciate you being on the program. I look forward to the next opportunity.
Thank you. Love it. Have a great day.
Let's take a break, and we'll come back. We'll talk about some of those judicial nominees. We'll get into a couple of other key issues about this. So we've talked about, even in the previous hour, about taking a knee. We're getting to taking down some more statues. In this case, a plaque. Can't even have George Washington's name in the church where he actually worshiped. We'll talk about all that right after these important messages.
From director Kevin Sorbo and executive producer Sean Hannity comes Let There Be Light. Saul Harkins is a man who has turned away from God, but a near-fatal car crash gives him one last chance to renew his life, his family, and his faith. Let There Be Light, rated PG-13, may be inappropriate for children under 13. Now playing. More information is available at LetThereBeLightMovie.com.
Christianity is based in history, on evidence, and all truth revealed in God's Word is for our good, not just spiritually, but in every way. Point of View's mission is to restore God's truth in our culture, and to do it effectively, we need you as a partner. Your gift helps inspire people, young and old, from coast to coast to rebuild truth in their communities. Join the Truth Team today at pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Get off the sidelines. Pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this. are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Talked about taking a knee in the first part of this hour and last hour. Going to get into this whole issue of removing a plaque of George Washington from a church, Christ Church, where he actually worshiped. We're going to get into some of the issues of the judicial nominees, which I mentioned just a minute ago, and then a couple of other issues related to censorship. So there's a lot to cover. And of course, if there's some comments we've made about the pro-life movement or pro-choice gotcha questions, that is fair game as well. Open line this last half hour, 1-800-351-1212. Before we get back into some of these issues, let me just mention kind of a program note. Tomorrow, as we come to the end of October, first of all, we want to spend a little bit of time, one last time, mentioning Martin Luther. And the reason we are doing it in this particular case is we're going to have the co-author of the Martin Luther on Trial. Now, you might remember that we had earlier this month, if you listen to the program on a regular basis, Max McLean. And he has put together this really outstanding play. I've seen clips of it already, and he's bringing it to the Dallas area this week. And I think others of you will see it around the country. But we have Chris Cragen with us, Cragen Day, who actually will be with us and talk about the production of that and the writing of it. And you might remember earlier last week, we spent some time talking about what the church should be. I'm talking about the body of Christ, but the building and worship and all of the rest. And so that was a conversation we had with Todd Wagner, who is the pastor of Watermark. I thought it would be good to have a conversation briefly about worship itself and hymns. So we have Keith Geddes with us tomorrow. We're going to do that just briefly. But if that is a popular feature, we may do it again in the future. So again, we're going to have a chance to maybe expand your interest in the arts by talking first about music for part of our first hour before we get back into the news, and then plays and productions in the second hour before we get into some of the other stories. So I think that should be of help to you and of interest, since we have spent quite a bit of time this month as we come to the 500th anniversary of the Protestant Reformation, due to the, at least belief, there's some question as to whether or not it actually happened on October 31st, 1517, but whether it happened on that day or a day before or a day after, certainly that is kind of the day set aside for the posting of the 95 Theses on the Wittenberg door by Martin Luther, which in many cases began the Protestant Reformation. Rather talk about that than Halloween. So, again, you can do whatever you want. And certainly if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. One of the questions that I seem to get as I've traveled around, and I've been in Oregon, I've been in California, I've been in Alaska. I'm planning to get to see some of you in the Midwest and the East Coast and and even the Northeast a little bit later. But one of the questions I get most often is, are we ever going to be able to see these nominees put forward by President Donald Trump get confirmed? Because it seems to be taking forever to confirm them. Well, here are the numbers. About 150 vacancies exist right now in the federal courts. Now, there's no vacancies on the Supreme Court, so we're talking about vacancies on the appeal court and vacancies on the district courts. But we have 150 vacancies. This is huge. I mean, you just realize that none of these courts are very well staffed, if you think about it in that regard. We have, according to the latest numbers I just received, 56 nominees that have been put forward by President Donald Trump. That's really impressive, I might add, because sometimes both President George W. Bush and President Barack Obama were pretty kind of slow in getting their nominees up before the Supreme Court. The problem has not been on the part of Donald Trump or his administration. The problem has been in the Senate. And if you listen to our Friday program last week, Kelly Shackelford reminded us that you have one of these federal nominees that was actually nominated by President Barack Obama and then lapsed. So he was renominated again by President Donald Trump. And nevertheless, you had Chuck Schumer, the Senate Minority Leader, basically slow-walking that nomination and requiring a cloture debate and a cloture vote, which takes 30 hours. So it's obvious that they're slow-walking any nominee, even nominees that probably would be acceptable to both Republicans and Democrats. Again, think this through. President Obama nominated this individual. Donald Trump simply renominated this individual again, and they still went through this long and tedious process. The estimates that come from our friends at the Free Market Foundation, at First Liberty, I should say, which used to be Free Market Foundation, are that at the rate we're going, it would take 13 years to actually finish the nominee process for the 56 nominees that have been put forward by President Trump. So you can see how slow the process has become. Nevertheless, we have at least votes coming up this week for a couple of people. I mentioned one of those, the Notre Dame law professor, Amy Coney Barrett, 7th Circuit. You also have a Michigan Supreme Court Justice, Joan Larson, for the 6th Circuit, a Colorado Supreme Court Justice, Allison Eade, for the 10th Circuit, and University of Pennsylvania law professor Stefanos Bilbas for the 3rd Circuit. So those are a few, but never the way, this is a very significant concern, and so one that is worthy of your prayers and also your comments to your 2 United States senators, because this cannot continue. We will eventually have more and more vacancies in the courts, and 150 vacancies right now, that's just unacceptable. Just before I get to our next call, let me set that up a little bit. And that is this weekend we had, and I'm going to do a commentary on this, leaders in the church where President George Washington attended decided that they were going to remove a plaque in his honor out of concern for somebody that might be offended by this. Now, by the way, they're removing the plaque that has information about Robert E. Lee. Well, you know, we all have said before, what starts with the Confederate generals continues on. And Christ Church in Alexandria, Virginia, will take down its memorial, marking the pew where President George Washington sat with his family, because they said it was not acceptable. Here's their quotes. They said, "The plaques in our sanctuary make some in our presence feel unsafe or unwelcome. Some visitors and guests who worship with us chose not to return because they received an unintended message from the prominent presence of the plaques. And many in our congregation feel a strong need for the church to stand clearly on the side of all are welcome, no exceptions." So I thought the piece by Jay Cost was very good. I'll just read part of it, and then we'll get to the comments from some of you. He said, Christ Church is a private religious institution, and it can do what it wants with the Washington Monument. The First Amendment right to religious freedom allows churches to do whatever foolhardy thing they choose. I would have it no other way. He says, still, we are likewise free under the First Amendment to criticize this harebrained decision to disrespect the nation's first president. Christ Church, he said, should be ashamed of itself. For starters, Washington actually freed his slaves when he died, the only major founding father to do so, Reverend Richard Allen, who co-founded the African Methodist Episcopal Church, eulogized Washington in 1799, shortly after his death, as a patron of black Americans. And it goes through the message given by Reverend Richard Allen, of course, African American. And he said, of course, Washington freed his slave, could have freed him earlier. He did not. And it's fair to criticize him for this, although his posthumous manuscript actually indicates a guilty conscience. But then he goes on to say that some of these monuments and public testimonies serve an educational function. He says, further, they promote public tranquility. He says, I'm reminded of the famous exchange of letters between Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, which Madison offered a very strong case for appreciating the past. And so this piece, which we might post tomorrow, is just an illustration as to why, before we start ripping off plaques, tearing down monuments, trying to rewrite the history, we would be wise to really think this through. And in this particular case, I guess I never saw this one coming. This famous church, Christ Church, historic religious institution in Alexandria, Virginia, has decided and announced over the weekend they're going to pull down the plaque that says George Washington worshipped here. What say you? If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take a break, and we'll come back and get some of your phone calls. I can see a few of them coming in right now, so if you'd like to join us, again, that number is 1-800-351-1212. A decision being made, of course, in a very historic church to no longer acknowledge that George Washington sat there. And a lot of it has to do with simply this idea that this might be a trigger warning. Somebody might see that George Washington actually worshiped here, actually sat in this particular pew, and because, after all, he had slaves, that's reason enough to pull the plaque out of the church and to no longer acknowledge that he was a parishioner in that particular church. Now, to be fair, they also pulled out the one on Robert E. Lee, because his family, of course, worshiped there as well. But this has gone far beyond Robert E. Lee. It's now gone to George Washington. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. A recent article out of Canada reports that ethicists are recommending that conscience laws be modified for the medical profession. The argument suggests that physicians should not have the right to opt out of providing such services as prescribing contraceptives when a patient requests such services. According to the authors, quote, doctors must put patients' interest ahead of their own integrity. If this leads to feelings of guilty remorse or them dropping out of the profession, so be it, unquote. That is truly shocking language that we should take note of, especially since, as the article in the National Post points out, every country in the civilized world recognizes at least some form of conscientious objection. Not only do the authors suggest that certain professions should be closed to those whose integrity would require the abandonment of the conscience to practice it, it fails to understand what conscience actually is. The reason we provide protections for the exercise of conscience is because people should not be made by the government to make their conscience optional. As Dr. Robert George of Princeton University has put it, quote, the right of conscience is a right to do what one judges oneself to be under an obligation to do, unquote. We will see whether Canada takes up the proposal by its professors, but south of the border, we must be vigilant that we never permit the government to make optional what our Creator has made obligatory. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
Hi, I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. You can protect your religious freedom by going to firstliberty.org to download your free Religious Liberty Protection Kit. Our attorneys created kits for churches, ministries, Christian schools, military members, students, and teachers, and the workplace. Get your Religious Liberty Protection Kit at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Arizona first. Wayne, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
You know, first off, you change the change of family values and the change of this and the change of that and so on and so forth. Picky. These people are picking this United States apart, and it won't be too long until there's not a United States anymore to pick apart.
Well, again, if you start saying, well, we're going to maybe not stand for the Star-Spangled Banner and the national anthem, that may be part of it. If you begin to say we can redefine marriage any way we want, that's another part of it. If you can say that America is not exceptional, but it's just like any other nation, it's full of flaws, which is what we oftentimes teach in our schools, and on and on and on. Yeah, you can see that the social cohesion that was part and parcel of America really begins to be eroded. And back to this piece by Jay Cost. I didn't read all of it because I know we're getting close on time. Maybe we'll get more into it tomorrow. He talks about the fact that these monuments, public testimonials, and in this case, we're just talking about a plaque. So, we're not even talking about something that significant, that those serve an educational function. If nothing else, he points out that we're not going to get the whole story of George Washington by looking at a $1 bill. We're not going to get that by, and given the historic illiteracy, I think it's important that ever more that we educate our young people, not only about the good, but the bad and the ugly, the good, bad, and the ugly. And were these flawed individuals? Yes. Were these founders amazing individuals? Yes, they were. I think those are certainly some issues. But again, pulling the plaque off of George Washington at Christ Church, I didn't see that one coming. I've seen some of the statues coming down, especially if it's Stonewall Jackson or Robert E. Lee. But all the predictions we made about the fact that they're not going to stop just with some of the Confederate generals, I think, have been borne out this weekend. Don't you think?
Yes, I agree.
Well, I appreciate your phone call. Let's give a few more of you a chance to join our conversation today. 1-800-351-1212. We'll stay in Arizona for another minute or two. Tammy, thank you for joining us today on Point of View.
Thank you for having me. America is supposed to be one nation under God. And God is very specific about what he wants. And it's so surprising to me that it's taking the world to get the church to see what I'm about to say. God tells us in his scriptures that we are not to have graven images of anything of the heavens, in the earth, or under, or in the sea. And having those images and plaques and things like that are really, truly graven. And I want to encourage them for the stand that they made, because as a follower of Christ, I appreciate that in some ways. As an American, I'm disturbed by their behaviors, how they're getting it across. But, however, as a Christian, I applaud the church for finally making a stand. And I also invoke them to read the scriptures and to study the scripture and to see that God said he doesn't want us to have these things. So we might also reconsider the cross and images of Christ, because we don't know the cross, what it looked like. We don't know Christ and what he looked like. All we know is that we are to believe in something that is, unseen, and know that he's God, and that his son is Christ, and that Christ came to die for our sin. In the book of Romans, it says we are not to, Paul is very clear, because Christ came, we are to give occasion to sin? Surely not. We're supposed to strive for the mark of perfection daily. And I encourage my brothers and sisters across this country to start looking at some things that might be causing divisions throughout the religions, where we could actually be together, serving God in unity.
One of the things in Exodus 20 where it says that, it goes on to say that you should not bow down to them or serve them. It sure seems to me that the context there is the issue of idolatry, because it's written at a time when you had, golden calves and things of that nature. So it doesn't seem like it's prohibiting images, because if, taking where you're going, it almost seems like we couldn't have picture books about Jesus. I heard you say you're not sure you want to have the cross. Even the film that we just talked about in the first hour, it seems, go ahead.
About Christ. I mean, books are great. We should have books about Christ. I think that we should really gain our focus on knowing that we should be studying God's word, and in faith, practicing it, And I really do believe that we should evaluate those scriptures, whether it be a golden calf or a new truck or
Well, again, I think the focus there on Exodus 20, verses 4 and 5, I think really is on idolatry. But again, the idea that we would worship the creation rather than the creator. We see that in the book of Romans and things like that as well. Let me take at least one more phone call. We'll go to Georgia and talk to Steve. What would you like to add to our conversation today?
Thank you for having me on. First of all, I want to try to make this as neutral as possible. I do have my own side, but those that enter the Church of Christ for any reason other than knowledge of God or knowledge of Christ really aren't entering the church for the right reason. If they're seeking plaques or seeking what's in the church for any reason other than there for knowledge of God, then they're certainly not in the church for the right reason. With that being said, if the Christ Church wishes, and I fully, am in agreement with them having that right to do so, if they wish to pull a plaque with the father of our country, George Washington's picture on it, for whatever reason, maybe they should pull their offering plate, because as it passes by parishioners, someone may get offended seeing George Washington's picture on the dollar bill or a coin.
I wasn't sure where you're going with that. We're tight on time, but I think that was a good way to kind of end the conversation. And unfortunately, I wish we had more time. Well, we'll perhaps get back to this tomorrow, because for those of us that love history, when you have sometimes had a chance to travel to Virginia, whether it's Williamsburg or in this particular case, Alexandria, it is kind of fun to say, what would it have been like to be in this church? And, of course, I had a chance to preach in a church a while back in Connecticut, which is the church that Jonathan Edwards attended when he went to Yale. It's not the church where he preached when of course, the famous sermon, Sinners in the Hands of the Angry God, but it's still kind of fun to just say, there's a lot of history here, and sometimes it's fun to at least acknowledge that. But anyway, the plaque's coming off. And that's because there are people that would get a trigger warning. They would just be uncomfortable just even seeing that an individual who at one time owned slaves was in the church. So I'm sure they will not only pull the plaque, but they will stop even mentioning in any of their literature, any of the websites, or maybe in any other communication that George Washington was ever there. It's known as a good way to expunge individuals from history. So I can see many of you wanted to ask a question, make a comment, agree or disagree. We'll just have to postpone those till tomorrow. We're going to talk a little bit about worship with Keith Geddes, and we'll also talk about Martin Luther on Reformation Day. Some people call it Halloween, and we will do that. And, of course, if you would like more information on some of the articles we have talked about today, they're available at the website, pointofview.net. Want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Chuck Bentley of Crown Financial Ministries believes you hold the key to powerful and lasting change. You can be a hero.
Are you happy with what you're seeing in our culture? Are you really pleased with the direction of this country? If you're not, then do your duty. Give. Make an investment. Put your money where your heart's desire is to make a difference.
You don't need a colorful cape and costume to be a hero. All you need is to get off the bench and into the game, and to support the fight for faith, family, and freedom. Join the team. Join Truth Team 360 with Point of View Radio. We need heroes to step up this week, today, and do what you can. Visit pointofview.net/team and choose your level of support. Be an important part of Point of View's 45-year legacy of changed lives and changed communities.
It will be a gift that pays off for eternity.
Pointofview.net/team, or give by calling 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're